again. We are back for week 3 of Black Girl Magic Book Chat, Halloween edition, where all month long, I, Larissa, the African American Resource Center Coordinator, is sharing with y'all books by Black and African American authors in the genres of horror and thriller and mystery. The book I read this week is a bit of a switch from the horror that we read the first week, and then last week sort of fantastical mystery. It wasn't the book that I had originally chosen, which was all checked out when I was ready to read it. It is the same author though, and y'all, I was not disappointed that I picked it up. The author, I've read a book by him before, so I was really excited to pick up another to share with y'all because I was hoping, and it was true, that it was going to be as good as the first one that I read. So for sure, was not disappointed at all that it was the book that I had picked up. So I wanted to show you all the cover. I don't have the physical book. I ended up having to read the ebook. So I have that here. Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby. Um, y'all, S.A. Cosby's good. Okay. Like I said, this is just my second book that I've read from him. But if everything else is like these two, I'm like, yes, sign me up. So, like I said, I read Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby, and it has been classified as a crime thriller. When you look up S.A. Cosby and they talk about some of his other works, you get that they classify him as Southern noir, which I like that because that's kind of what you get. There's like some gothicy pieces and there's a lot happening. He's really good. But this one right here, I think they classified it as a crime thriller, and that's what it is. It reads, y'all, like an action thriller, crime, action, crime, action. An action movie, like crime action, that kind of thing. It reads like that, like your favorite shoot 'em up movie. That's probably a bad way to say it, but it reads like that. But there's substance in it. There's a story there, and it's really good. It kept me riveted. It did, y'all. So our book opens at a funeral of two young men, Isaiah and Derek. They are husbands, a married couple that had been violently killed, and they have left behind a 3-year-old daughter, a lot of friends. They had a really strong friend community, and they leave behind a grieving family. And the book follows two of those family members who seem to be grieving the most. We have Ike, who is Isaiah's father. He's a black man. He lives in the suburbs. He owns a landscaping business, and he's got a violent past that he has given up after he got out of prison a few years ago. And then there's also Buddy Lee. Buddy Lee is Derek's father. He is also a white man. He is a white man living in a kind of rundown trailer. And he spends much of his time drinking. But he's also got a violent past that he's given up after he got out of prison years and years ago. And so these two men team up after their son's case goes cold. So the police officers come to them and say, hey, like, we have been looking for the folks who did this to your children. We can't find them, essentially. And so we're kind of lagging on the case. And so these guys say, no, that's not what's up. Two men who have been in prison for various violent crimes, they've got some skills. So they say, hey, we can figure this out together. So these two men who are actually a lot alike, but seemingly are not on the surface. They don't seem to have much in common except their ex-con status. And then one other thing that is pertinent to this book, and it's the way that they treated their sons when their sons were alive. So because I think that the reason we see them grieving so much in this book, and the reason they're so intent on finding this justice, and maybe even intent on finding their own brand of forgiveness, is because when Isaiah and Derek were alive, both Ike and Buddy Lee treated them horribly because of their sexuality. these men, these so-called uber masculine guys, these violent, at least in the past, guys, thought that their son's gayness was some sort of failing, something that they could beat out of them. And when they couldn't, they thought it was something that they could ignore. But they loved them, however poorly they showed that. And when Isaiah and Derek died, they decided to make sure that the person who did it paid. And so, y'all, this book is wild, okay? Like, it is. The whole time I'm reading, I'm like, oh my goodness. So, as they uncover clues, as you do when you're trying to solve a murder, they're, meeting people who their sons hadn't known, trying to figure out if anybody can, pinpoint what happened or help them figure it out. So, as they are uncovering these clues, they learn some things about some of the stuff that their kids were involved in and kind of unknowingly involved in. There's some high up officials, some government type officials involved, plus some gang activity, some Confederate gang activity that really ups the stakes, because not everybody we meet at the beginning makes it to the end, which sucks. I also forgot to mention. So I mentioned Confederate gang activity. So, this book is set in Virginia. I think a lot of, if not all, of S.A. Cosby's books are set in Virginia. I think that's where he's from. And so it's set in Virginia, and usually in the backwoods of Virginia. And so in this book, you have these people who are good old boys, as they're often called. These guys who, still very much view, white people as the top, and anybody else, below. White straight men at the top, to be quite honest, and anybody else below, and anybody else as theirs to do with as they please. And so there is a ton of violence in this book. It's more violence than I read. So be forewarned. But the book is moving, okay? Because at its core, it is also the story of this unlikely friendship we see begin to happen between Ike and Buddy Lee. They really get to know each other. And that's why I say, like, you really think that they're these different guys. And sure, they were raised differently with different ideals. But at their core, I think they're very similar in a way. And so they get to know each other. We get to see them grow a lot. We get to see them grapple with their sons' homosexuality and even just the general idea of it. And so they really learn that, honestly, homosexuality and all of the in its whole spectrum, it exists, right? And it's nothing to be ashamed of, because love is love. Because they see that there's no way that two people who loved each other as much as their sons did, two people who loved other people as much as their son, that can't be wrong, right? So they see that. Um, and we also see Ike learn that while racism is alive and well and that white privilege exists, that privilege doesn't always look like money or education or things, these tangible things, these things that we expect, I guess, white people to have because they have a certain amount of privilege to walk through the world in a way that many Black and African American people do not. Um, and then we also see Buddy Lee recognize that all of the talk that he had heard as a child, all of the people calling Black folks the N word and other races being called their derogatory terms, given those derogatory terms given to people of color, he recognizes that yes, it's the way he grew up, and yes, he kind of didn't pay it much attention, but he recognizes that these words have power, these words do harm, these words and these names have real life implications. And so you really see them come to terms with like the reality of the world that we live in. This book had me hooked. Okay. It did. I was flipping pages like crazy. And like I said in last week's video, I think that's one of my favorite things that I love about Black folks writing these sort of horror and thriller novels is that there's, and I know that that's true in other races too, but there's so much social commentary that's particular to our culture, that I really appreciate and can learn from. I think there's a lot of little nuggets in here that make you like, that makes a lot of sense. So like I said, this book had me hooked. I also read All Sinners Bleed a couple of months ago, which is also by S.A. Cosby, and it was just as incredible. So if you have not read that, I am going to plug that for y'all too. We have two more books left this month. Can y'all believe this month has gone by as quickly as it has? It has. We've got two more books left. Next week we are venturing over into the YA world with a book called We Don't Swim Here. And if we all know African American sort of history with swimming and public pools, and so I'm actually really, really excited to see where this goes, and I can't wait to share it with y'all. So go ahead and grab your copy of Razorblade Tears, or grab your copy of Jackal from last week. Um, and I'll be back. Can't wait to share the next one with y'all next week.